To make editing much quicker, sometimes it's much easier to start from an already combined image than just to start from one of the exposures. To combine an image, you can use any of the HDR tone mapping programs. In this video, I will show you Oloneo Photoengine, as I think that's one of the best. So let's take a look at it. I selected here one of the 5 exposure shot of the Apollo Beach in Bratislava. I'm currently in Lightroom as I want to make a few tweaks to it before I open it in Oloneo. So let's get to it. I choose the middle exposure and I see I have to correct the horizontal line as it's a little crooked. So let's do that first. Yeah, somewhere around here should be okay. And then, as always, I under lens correction remove the chromatic aberrations. It's always best doing it right in the raw stage, because if you leave it there, they will just get worse when you combine the shot, and they are harder to remove. And I will also do the profile correction, so it removes a little bit of the lens distortion that's there. I see it also removed the lens vignetting, which I actually don't like because I quite liked that the sky was a little darker here and same here. So I will go under profile and remove the vignetting, put the vignetting back. So I think this is quite okay. I still will maybe go under detail and add a little bit noise reduction, just a touch. You don't need much because this photo does not look to be that much noisy. So I have this, so I can sync it to all the 5 exposures, synchronize, and now I will export it as 16-bit TIFF files, no change in size, and Pro Photo RGB color space, as I like to use that as it keeps the most colors in your photos. So I go export. It's 5 files, so it takes a little while because they are TIFF files, but we will quickly be there. Okay, second one, third, okay, fourth, and the last one. Okay, so now we have these 5 files, so I can open my Oloneo Photoengine and load them in. So, okay, when you start Oloneo Photoengine, you start in this browse window and change this browse edit help. We are in browse. Here you have to choose the folder from which you have to select the images. So you just click these 3 dots and go into the folder where you have the images and click open. We are already there, so nothing changes, but if you have it in different pattern I have, just use that. Now I have to select all the files I want to work with, and on the right side you have the project image selection, click add. They will load into this small window and you can see all the files and their info. Under it you have 3 different ways to edit your photos. There is HDR tone map, HDR relight, and HDR denoise. For what we need, we will use the HDR tone map, and as you can see the others are not available, as you need to have same images for that, not like I have different exposures. But we have to use HDR tone map. Here you have 2 things you can choose, and that is if you want to auto align the images. That's if you shot handheld and you are not sure that they are aligned. For me, this is not the problem, as these were taken from a tripod. Another thing you have to choose is if you want to have some ghost removal on your photos. Again, if I had something moving like a ship or anything else in this, I would choose one of these 2 options. I personally usually choose the method 1, as it gives me usually better results than the method 2. But I suggest you experiment with both. So on some photos the method 2 is better, on some the method 1. Hard to say which one is better in general. But in this photo, again, I don't need any alignment, I don't need any ghost removal, so I just go and create the HDR tone mapped project. Okay, as you can see, Oloneo is very quick. It loaded the images and created a tone map project. Currently, this does not look nothing special, but that's because it's just combined and nothing else. what we need to do is change the settings for this. So we go to the right side, and the most important setting here is the TM strength. When you start moving this slider, you will see that first the darks become brighter and then later the bright parts become darker. I'm already too much, yes, you can see this is already quite ugly, so I have to pull it back. I usually end up somewhere around 50, where I get really nice exposure in the dark areas, and the bright areas are still a little too bright, but I can correct that later in Photoshop. What I want is to get as a nicest picture in most of the photos, so I have a nice exposure under the bridge, nice exposed dogs, nice exposed city. Everything does not have to be nicely exposed. So another thing I probably will add here is a little bit of contrast, as the photo looks a little flat here, so I just push up the contrast a little, and I get also quite nice colors from these contrast adjustments. Usually I would say this is okay, but as I want to show you more about this program, we will go to other settings here. But this is the version I will use for the further editing I do in Photoshop. So let's see what we have here more. The second setting here, detail strength, is can create a lot of detail in your photos and a lot of local contrast. But I personally use it very sparingly. I show you why, because once you start pushing this up, you get this really ugly, one would say HDR look, and it stops looking natural. It's become, yeah, I think ugly. So if you want to use this, I suggest very low numbers and very carefully, so maybe a little but not much. I usually don't use it at all because I like the more natural look. Then you have the exposure. With this you can change the exposure of the photo, or you can go with fine exposure where you have much more control about what you change. As you see, it goes really by small steps. I usually don't do this, but yeah, I can imagine photos where you need that. Auto exposure, I suggest leaving it on, because when you turn it off you have to really play with the exposure yourself. Much easier just leave it on. Same with the contrast, auto contrast, leave it on. Contrast, if you need that your photo is much too flat. It sometimes happens that when you combine, the photos become quite flat and gray. Little contrast helps here a lot. Another thing very important here, natural HDR mode. When you click on it, Oloneo will remove all the oversaturated colors in your photo. Again, depends on the photo. If you're doing a really night scene with a lot of yellow lights or something like that, it can easily happen that when you push the strength up, it becomes very oversaturated, and just clicking this will correct all this. In this case, this photo is not so oversaturated. It's quite nice, actually. The glow looks quite nice, so I don't need it here. But again, if you feel that your photo is very saturated, turn it on. Another thing here, low dynamic tone, is the same settings you get in all other editing programs like Lightroom or Photoshop. You have exposure, brightness, contrast, saturation. It's nothing different. It's normal. You can add saturation, remove saturation, add contrast, remove contrast. Nothing out of the ordinary. Another, here you can change the white balance if you didn't do so in Lightroom. But again, I suggest doing it in Lightroom, not here, because if you want to blend this image with the original images, you want it to have the same white balance as the original images. Other than this, you have the print toning or curves and hue saturation on curves. I usually don't use this here. If you want to use the Oloneo as the final step in your editing, that you don't want to edit your photos anymore, you can play with this a little more, but for my workflow, this is the result I wanted. I will not change anything more, so I just change the strength and the contrast. Maybe a little more to the strength, a little more to the contrast. So let's save this. And I save it. You can save it as the Photoengine file. I usually don't do this because I have no use for that file, so I just go and save it as a 16-bit TIFF and click save. Keep the color space as I used for the expos of per photo, 16-bit color depth. Compression, you don't have to. Again, the file will be smaller, but again, this file is a temporary file that you can delete after you create your final image, so it does not really matter how big it is. So I just click OK, and it's saved. Close this up, I don't need this. I usually don't go back into Oloneo to read it once I'm finished. So we are back in Bridge, and I have my 5 exposures and the HDR result. So I just load them, select them all up, and choose Tools, Photoshop, Load Files in Photoshop Layers. What it does, it will create for me a new file where it loads all the 5 exposure plus the 6th finished one into layers. So I pull the HDR one to the bottom, and I start my correction from here. So I know I have to darken the castle, darken the parts of the bridge, maybe brighten a little these rocks here, but it's still much easier to start from this than to start from this, because this is much more work, because I see I still have to, the sky needs to be corrected, the bridge needs to be corrected more, and so on. On this one, I don't need to correct the bridge anymore, I don't need to correct the sky anymore, so a lot less work. I have this file already finished here. So this is my finished edit, and as you can see, this was the Oloneo result. What I did was tone the bright spots from the darkest exposure with this luminance mask. Then I brightened the rocks in the bottom part, as I wanted a little more highlight on them, again with the luminance mask just on the rocks. Then I continued with the color effects filter and added a pro contrast to get all the get more brightness and local contrast into the shot, but again I used a luminance mask to remove the pro contrast from the brightest spots, as it created clipping in them, and I didn't want them. If you see, this is without it, so this is too bright, this is with it, it's okay. I then added the curves layer and painted in more contrast into the water, and then I added an overall curves layer to get more contrast into the whole shot. So that was my edit on this. As you can see, when I used Oloneo to create my initial blend, my whole edit was only 6 more layers, so nothing that complicated. If I started from the original exposure, I would have much more work to do, because I would have to correct many more things. Again, this works on some photos, does not work on every photo. It's as every tone mapping program, the result can vary. So you can try it out. If you like the result it creates, and if yes, work with that. If you don't like the result, you can try a different program like Photomatix, or you can just go and do the manual blending yourself. So this is for this video, and in the next one we will look at Photomatix.